I was zip-tying the last string of red, white, and blue lights around the porch railing when I heard the sound I dreaded most in this neighborhood: heels clacking too fast for comfort and a throat clear that could curdle milk. "Elliot Walters," came the high-pitched drawl. "We need to talk." Immediately. I turned slowly, already regretting everything about this day. There she was, Marlene, president of the Oakridge HOA, wielding her clipboard like a sword and wearing that signature scowl that made you feel like you'd just been caught smuggling fireworks across state lines. "Morning, Marlene," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Can it wait? I've got a lot to finish before—" "No, it cannot," she snapped, stepping closer and pointing her pen at the huge banner I just hung over the garage. "Welcome home, Luke." Marlene sniffed like the air offended her. "This circus you're setting up. It's a violation of Code 14A, Section 3. No unapproved large gatherings, no amplified music, and definitely no military vehicles on private streets." I blinked. "Military vehicles? What are you talking about?" She flipped through her papers like she was shuffling a deck of guilt. "Your son is bringing his entire platoon, is he not?" "That's what I heard from Valerie at the garden club. His unit. Not a platoon, and they're not rolling in tanks, Marlene, just a few trucks." "They're Marines, not Transformers." She crossed her arms. "Doesn't matter. It violates the peace clause, and if you don't cancel, the HOA will be forced to issue fines and possibly take legal action." I laughed, and it came out sharper than I expected. "My son just got back from deployment. 2 tours. He's been gone for nearly 18 months. I'm throwing him a homecoming party, and there's not a single thing in your little rulebook that's going to stop that." Marlene narrowed her eyes. "You think you're above the rules?" "No," I said, stepping off the porch. "I just think the rules weren't written to punish someone for welcoming their son home alive." She didn't respond, just jotted something down and walked off like she'd won. I watched her disappear behind her front door, the one with the stupid live, laugh, love sign hanging crooked above the mailbox. I wasn't about to back down. Luke had been through hell. The least I could do was give him a proper welcome, even if it meant defying the most power-hungry woman in Oakridge. Still, as I turned back to the decorations, I had a feeling Marlene wasn't done. And I was right. The next morning, I was in the garage arranging folding chairs when my neighbor, Raj Patel, wandered over with a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. He looked concerned, which wasn't like him. Raj was the neighborhood's unofficial tech guy. He ran a small computer repair business from his basement and usually kept to himself unless someone's Wi-Fi went down. "Elliot," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "You seen this?" He turned the screen toward me. On it was a mass email subject line. "Urgent HOA update, unauthorized event on Maple Crescent." I read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It was a full-blown community alert. Marlene had emailed every homeowner within 2 blocks, warning them of potential disturbances and heightened risks associated with unapproved military presence. She even listed a fabricated schedule of events, none of which I had planned, including a low-altitude flyover and late-night tactical drills. I looked at Raj. "Where'd she get this nonsense?" "She made it up," he said, lowering his voice. "And she copied the city code in the footer to make it look official." I checked. That section she quoted, it's about commercial noise ordinances from 20 years ago. I clenched my jaw. "She's trying to stir people up before Luke even gets here." Raj gave me a small nod. "You want help setting up cameras?" "I've got a few spares." By lunchtime, we had 3 discrete cameras mounted, one above the garage, one on the front light post, and another tucked into the birdhouse near the sidewalk. They all streamed directly to my phone. I wasn't taking chances. Around 2 o'clock, I headed to City Hall. If Marlene was going to weaponize outdated municipal codes, I needed to know what my actual rights were. The clerk, a woman named Janelle with a sharp memory and a sharper haircut, pulled up the zoning and event ordinances for our area. "Nothing here prohibits a private gathering on your own property," she said, tapping her screen. And military personnel visiting as guests, that's not even close to a violation. She raised an eyebrow. You said she sent this to the entire neighborhood? Every single house, I said. And she used an old city code to back it up. That's impersonation of a municipal notice, Janelle muttered. That's not just unethical, it's criminal if she's representing it as coming from us. I left with a printed copy of the actual ordinances, a business card from a city attorney, and a renewed sense of purpose. When I got home, 2 more neighbors had stopped by Sharon from 3 doors down, and Lewis, who owned the bakery on the corner. Both had gotten the email and wanted to know if the rumors were true. Are we seriously going to have helicopters over our houses? Sharon asked, hugging her purse like it could shield her. I handed her a copy of the city ordinance. No helicopters, no drills, just barbecue, music, and some guests who served with my son. That's it, Lewis nodded slowly. She's trying to scare people. She's more than that, I said. She's lying, and I'm going to prove it. That evening, as I was testing the speaker system for the playlist, I noticed a white Lexus slowly rolling past my house. It paused at the mailbox, then pulled into Marlene's driveway. The passenger door opened, and a man in a suit stepped out, tall, thin, and carrying a briefcase. I watched from the porch, hidden by the edge of the column. He knocked once. Marlene opened the door immediately, like she'd been waiting. They disappeared inside. I stepped back into the garage and called my cousin, Dana. She worked for a legal aid group in the next county over and had a knack for digging into public records. Can you check something for me? I asked. I need to know if anyone's filed a claim against the HOA recently. Or if Marlene's name shows up in any court cases. Dana didn't ask questions. She just said, "Give me an hour." While I waited, Luke called. His voice was stronger than the last time we spoke, but I could still hear the fatigue in it. "You sure it's okay?" he asked. "Bringing the guys, I mean. They want to be there," I told him. "And this neighborhood needs a reminder of what real service looks like." He was quiet for a moment. "We won't stay long, just a few hours. Then we'll head out. You stay as long as you want." As the sun dipped behind the trees, Dana called back. Her tone was different, sharper, more focused. "Found something," she said. 3 years ago, Marlene was named in a civil complaint, misappropriation of HOA dues. Someone accused her of funneling funds into a beautification project that turned out to be her own backyard. What happened? Settled out of court. No public admission of guilt, but the HOA board changed structure right after. Then, 6 months later, she got herself voted back in. I let out a breath. "Can you send me the case file? It'll take a day or 2, but yeah. I'll email what I can." The next morning, I printed the documents. Dana sent overnight copies of the complaint, the settlement, and minutes from the HOA meeting where the board restructured. I put them in a binder and labeled it plainly, "Evidence." By noon, the street was buzzing not with complaints but with folding tables, coolers, and neighbors offering to help. Lewis brought trays of empanadas. Sharon set up a lemonade stand. Even Raj's teenage daughter offered to run the music playlist, but Marlene wasn't done. At precisely 1:30, a city code enforcement vehicle pulled up in front of my house. A young officer stepped out, clipboard in hand, looking apologetic before he even knocked. "Mr. Walters?" "Yeah, we received an anonymous report of an unauthorized event." "Noise, temporary structures, traffic disruption." I handed him the binder, open to the page from Janelle. "Everything's within code. City Hall confirmed it, and I've got more." He flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. "Looks like you did your homework." He paused. "I'm supposed to do a walkthrough just to verify there's no commercial activity." "Go ahead," I said. "Want a soda?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe after." As he walked around the yard, 2 Humvees rolled up the street clean, quiet, and driven with more care than most of the neighborhood teenagers showed behind the wheel. Luke stepped out of the lead vehicle, uniform crisp, eyes scanning the street before landing on me. We hugged without a word, then he turned to the officer and gave him a respectful nod. "Marine Corps, sir," he said. "We're guests here today," the officer smiled. Looks like a good party, no violations here. As he left, Luke looked around. You weren't kidding, this is huge. Yeah, I said. And it's only just starting. But the real surprise came 20 minutes later when a second code enforcement vehicle arrived, this one accompanied by a plainclothes officer from the city's legal department. They weren't here for me. They walked right past the party, crossed the street, and knocked on Marlene's door. She answered, flanked by the same man in the suit from the day before. They didn't look pleased. The legal officer handed her a notice. She tried to argue. The man in the suit whispered something and her face went pale. She stepped back inside without another word. Raj wandered over holding a plate. What was that about? I didn't answer. I just opened the binder to the last page, a note from the city attorney confirming that any future impersonation of municipal authority would be grounds for prosecution. The notice they'd served her with was a cease and desist, and a preliminary investigation into her misuse of HOA funds had been reopened. Luke looked at the crowd gathering around the grill, the music bouncing off the houses, the kids playing tag across the lawn. You think she'll try anything else? I shook my head. Not with a city audit breathing down her neck, and definitely not with a dozen Marines watching. He laughed, the sound lighter than I'd heard in years. We stood there, father and son, surrounded by neighbors who'd seen through the lies, who'd come together not out of obligation but out of respect. And across the street, behind her tightly drawn curtains, Marlene was learning what it felt like to be powerless in the very community she once controlled. By the time the sun dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the lawn, the party was in full swing. The grill hissed with burgers and bratwursts, laughter echoed from the cornhole boards, and the scent of fresh-cut grass mingled with charcoal smoke. The Marines had settled in easily, chatting with neighbors, tossing footballs with kids, and making the street feel more alive than it had in years. Luke stood by the drinks table, deep in conversation with a retired postal worker named Henry, who was showing off a coin collection he'd brought out just for the occasion. It was peaceful, casual, and completely contrary to the chaos Marlene had predicted. That's when the unmarked black SUV rolled up. It didn't park like a visitor. It stopped in the middle of the street, engine still running. A tall man in a dark gray windbreaker stepped out, flashing a badge before he even said a word. Elliot Walters? I wiped my hands on a napkin and stepped toward him. Yeah, Detective Connor Wells, County Financial Crimes Division. I received a referral from the city legal department earlier this morning. Would you happen to have a few minutes to speak with me about the Oakridge HOA? I nodded, lowering my voice. You might want to talk to Raj too, he's the one who found the old city code misquote. I will, he said, scanning the crowd, but I need to speak with you first. Privately? We stepped into my garage where the music was muffled and the air cooler. He flipped open a thick folder and pulled out a few sheets of paper, each stamped with a county seal. I recognized one of them immediately. It was from the civil complaint Dana had found. Your cousin's name is Dana Walters. She's the one who sent me that file, yes. Good, he said, taking out a small notebook. Because this thing goes deeper than anyone thought. He explained that the city's legal department had flagged multiple transactions in the HOA's financial reports, some of which led to a dormant landscaping company registered under a shell business. That company, it turned out, was owned by a man named Leonard Grayson. Never heard of him, I said. You wouldn't have, Wells replied. But the Secretary of State's registry shows Marlene signed off as a managing agent on 2 of the permits. I blinked. She's been paying herself through fake vendors? Not just herself. Looks like one other board member too. We think they've skimmed close to $28,000 over the last 2 years. He pulled out a sealed envelope. I have a warrant to seize HOA financial records this afternoon. Before I do, I need to know if you have anything else, emails, messages, anything that shows how she's been operating outside her authority. I handed him the binder. Start on page 15. She impersonated a city official in an email to the entire neighborhood. He flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. "This is exactly what I needed, thank you." As he stepped back out into the light, I followed. The SUV was already parked in front of Marlene's house now, and a second unmarked car had arrived, its occupants stepping out with a portable scanner and a document box. Neighbors began to gather across the street, whispering. A few had phones out, not filming, just watching, unsure of what was unfolding. When Marlene opened her door, her eyes widened at the badge. She tried to close it, but Wells wedged his foot in the frame. "Marlene Tisdale, we have a warrant to inspect all financial records associated with the Oakridge Homeowners Association, including but not limited to printed ledgers, digital spreadsheets, and bank statements." She stammered. You don't understand. This is a mistake." "I've been president for years. I run everything by the board. The board has already been contacted," Wells said flatly. "And 2 members have provided preliminary cooperation statements." Her mouth opened, then closed. She stepped aside without another word. As the detectives entered the house, Luke came up beside me, arms crossed. "She's in trouble, isn't she?" "More than she realizes." The crowd across the street began to grow. Valerie from the garden club whispered something to her husband and walked away, clearly shaken. Lewis stood with his arms folded, watching the scene unfold like it was a courtroom drama. No one spoke loudly. No one defended her. One of the detectives came out carrying a laptop and a stack of folders. He handed them off to another officer, who slid them into a secure lockbox in the back of the SUV. "Does this mean the HOA's dissolved?" Sharon asked, coming up behind me. "Not yet," I said. "But this is the first time anyone's held them accountable." Detective Wells returned a few minutes later, looking satisfied. "We've got enough to move forward. A full audit starts Monday. In the meantime, I've advised the city to suspend all HOA operations until the investigation concludes." Luke gave a low whistle. "That's going to rattle some cages." "Better them than the people who live here," I said. That night the party stretched longer than planned. No one wanted to leave. The tension that had hovered over Oakridge like a summer storm was gone. People lingered, shared stories, and for the first time in years, it felt like a real community. I was helping Raj coil up the extension cords when he looked toward Marlene's darkened house. "You think the rest of the board knew?" "Some did," I said. "But no one spoke up until now." He shook his head. "All that power, and she used it to steal from her own neighbors. She thought no one would dig deep enough to catch her. Wasn't counting on a Marine homecoming, was she?" "No," I said, chuckling. "She really wasn't." The next morning, I woke to a stack of emails from neighbors. Thank you notes, mostly. A few apologies from people who'd believed the HOA's stories. There was even a message from a woman named Carla Simmons. She'd just moved in 2 streets over and had been too shy to attend the party. "I watched from my window," she wrote. "What you did yesterday that gave me hope." I responded to every message one by one. Not because I needed the praise, but because I wanted people to know that it mattered. That standing up for what was right, even when the odds felt stacked, could still make a difference. That afternoon, the city council sent out an official notice. Due to the ongoing investigation, Oakridge's HOA leadership was suspended indefinitely. All board activities frozen. A special community meeting would be held the following week to vote on whether the organization should be dissolved entirely or restructured under new oversight. Luke and I sat on the porch, watching a group of kids ride their bikes in lazy circles down the middle of the street. "You think people will show up to that meeting?" he asked. "They will now," I said. "No one wants this to happen again," he nodded slowly. "So what's next?" "We rebuild," I said. "Not just the HOA, this whole neighborhood. We make it ours again." He leaned back in the chair, eyes scanning the street that had once felt like a battleground. "Feels like we already started." And he was right. Because justice wasn't just about catching the corrupt, it was about reminding people that their voices mattered. That their homes weren't just investments or lines in a ledger. They were places of belonging. And no clipboard, no petty tyrant, and no fake regulation could ever take that away again. 2 days after the party, I was back on my ladder, taking down the last of the streamers. The air smelled like leftover charcoal and cut grass, but underneath it all was something cleaner relief. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up checking my driveway for citations or finding anonymous letters taped to my trash bins. A white sedan pulled up in front of my house. Not a city vehicle this time, but a civilian car with government plates. A woman in a tailored blazer stepped out, carrying a slim briefcase and a badge clipped to her belt. "Mr. Walters?" she asked, walking up the path. "Yes. Assistant District Attorney Claire Mendoza. I'm overseeing the investigation into the Oakridge HOA's financial practices. Do you have a moment?" I gestured toward the porch. "Of course." She set the briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside were labeled folders, all crisp and color-coded. She pulled one out and slid it toward me. "We've confirmed the shell company Detective Wells mentioned. The funds were funneled through a fictitious vendor account. What we didn't know until yesterday is that the same bank account was tied to a second entity, one registered under a relative of Miss Tisdale's. Her niece, to be exact." I flipped through the documents. The paper trail was airtight bank transfers, fake invoices, and even a forged signature from a former treasurer who'd moved out of state last year. "She forged board approval?" I asked. "On at least 8 separate payouts," Mendoza confirmed. "We've frozen the HOA's accounts and issued a subpoena for her personal banking records. She'll be arraigned later this week." I leaned back in the chair. "How far will this go?" Mendoza didn't blink. "If the judge agrees that the misappropriated funds exceed $25,000, it bumps from a misdemeanor to a felony. She could be looking at 5 years minimum." I closed the folder and tapped my fingers against the wood. "What about the board?" The vice president has agreed to testify. He claims he was intimidated into silence. We're offering him limited immunity in exchange for full cooperation. I looked across the street at Marlene's house. The blinds were drawn and a pile of unopened newspapers sat on her porch. The lawn hadn't been mowed since the day of the party. "Will her removal be permanent?" Mendoza nodded. "The HOA charter allows for a recall vote, but under these conditions, she's automatically disqualified from holding any position of authority tied to community governance. Ever." I didn't feel vindictive, just tired. Tired of the fear, the manipulation, the way she made people second-guess their right to enjoy their own homes. "Thank you," I said. Mendoza packed up the folder. "We'll keep you informed as the case proceeds. And Mr. Walters," I looked up. "You did the right thing. Most people don't stand up. They duck and wait until someone else does it." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That evening, the city held the emergency town hall meeting at the community center, and the turnout surprised everyone. Folding chairs filled to capacity, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. Even people from adjacent neighborhoods showed up, drawn by the headlines and the promise of something rare: accountability. The council chair, a stout man named Gregory Lane, opened the meeting. "We're here to determine the future of the Oakridge Homeowners Association," he said. "Given recent events, the options are clear. Dissolve the HOA entirely or elect an interim oversight committee to restructure it under city supervision." Before anyone could speak, a woman near the back raised her hand. She was older, with silver hair in a tight bun and a voice that cut through the murmurs like a tuning fork. "I say we vote now. No more delays. No more committees." A chorus of agreement rippled through the room. Gregory nodded. "Very well. All in favor of dissolving the HOA and transferring administrative duties to the city's neighborhood council, raise your hands." Nearly every hand went up. The few that didn't were either new residents or visibly confused. Gregory looked around. "Motion passes." Applause broke out loud, sustained. I saw Raj across the room, nodding slowly. Sharon clapped with both hands above her head. Louis had his arm around his teenage son, whispering something I couldn't hear, but it made the boy smile. Gregory raised his hand to quiet the room. City staff will coordinate the transition, and all current HOA obligations are frozen effective immediately. If you have ongoing disputes or fines, they are nullified pending review. Someone shouted, "Does that mean I can replant my maple tree now?" Laughter burst out and the tension finally broke. As the crowd dispersed, Luke met me outside. He'd stayed behind a few extra days to decompress, though I could tell his mind was halfway back to his unit already. "You really brought it down," he said, glancing back at the community center. "I just pulled the first brick. The rest fell on its own." He looked thoughtful. "You know, I've seen guys freeze up in combat zones, not because of bullets, but because they didn't trust the people beside them. That's what this place felt like when I got back. Everyone isolated, looking over their shoulder. And now it feels like people are finally facing the same direction." We walked in silence toward the truck. A breeze stirred the leaves, and for once, no one was watching from behind a curtain. The next morning, I found a small envelope taped to my front door. No return address. Inside was a single note written in cursive. "You reminded us what a neighborhood is supposed to be. Thank you." No name, no signature. I left it on the mantel. Luke flew out later that day. As I watched his plane disappear into the clouds, I thought about how small acts can ripple outward, how a single decision to string up flags and fire up a grill could unravel years of fear and silence. A week later, I saw the first real sign things were changing. A group of neighbors gathered on the corner lot, the one that had sat empty ever since the HOA blocked a swing set from being installed. They were digging holes, laying cement, and laughing like they'd done it 100 times. One of them, a young mother named Teresa, waved me over. "We're putting in a bench and a little free library," she said. "Called the city. No permit needed anymore." I helped lift the frame into place. The bolts were tight, the wood freshly varnished. Someone had already painted the words "Take one, leave one" across the front. That evening, I sat on that bench and watched the sun go down. No more board meetings. No more threats. Just neighbors talking, building, living. Across the street, Marlene's house had a for sale sign in the yard. The grass was still overgrown, but no one cared anymore. Her chapter in our neighborhood was over. A few nights later, I hosted a quieter gathering. No uniforms, no banners, just a few chairs, some iced tea, and people who remembered what it meant to belong. Louis brought cinnamon bread. Sharon brought her grandson. Raj set up a telescope, and we spent an hour watching Saturn rise. No one mentioned the HOA. They didn't need to. We weren't just residents anymore, we were a community, and that made all the difference.